Welcome, fellow healers of Aeternum, to the ultimate guide in healing in New World. Whether you're just starting out or you're looking at taking your healing skills to that next level, you have come to the right place. In this guide, we're going to cover everything that you need to know to become a top tier healer. Because let's face it, keeping your team alive isn't just a job, it's an art. We'll be breaking down everything from the basics of AoE healing to the more advanced techniques that let you maximize your group utility while dishing out some really good damage yourself. We'll dive deep into the healing abilities, the best armor and gear setups, your keybinds for your healing, and the optimal attribute allocation for balancing healing with damage output. But we're not stopping there. We'll also explore the ins and outs of rotations to ensure you're always maximizing your uptime, and we'll show you how to seamlessly weave in offhand weapons like the Void Gauntlet and the Flail to not only support your group, but to bring in some serious crowd control and utility to the fight. Plus, we'll cover the mindset you need to stay calm in the chaos of battle and offer some advanced healing tips to make sure you're always one step ahead of the enemy and the damage. So grab your life staff, your Void Gauntlet, or your Flail, and let's dive in. By the end of this guide, you'll be ready to keep your team standing strong while also showing those mobs who is boss. Alrighty, let's talk about what it really means to be a healer in New World. You might think your job is to keep those health bars full, right? Well, you're only half right. Healing is the backbone of your team's survival, but it is so much more than just keeping people alive. You're not a passive observer in the background, you're the one who controls the flow of the battle. In New World, a great healer doesn't just react to damage, you're actively shaping the fight, fortifying your team, empowering them to hit harder, and making fights smoother and faster. That's the difference between a good healer and a great healer. So let's break it down a bit. First, your healing abilities offer way more than just health. Take Orb of Protection. Sure, it heals, but it's also giving your entire group massive fortify and health regen, which means they're taking less damage, letting them stay in the fight longer. The fortify is huge, especially in those high damage encounters. And then there is Sacred Ground. It's your core AoE heal. It doesn't just heal, it buffs the rest of your healing abilities, along with paired with the weapon perk, fortifies your team. This is your bread and butter. It needs to be placed well, and you have a good healing machine working over time. Now, don't forget Beacon. Not only does it heal, but with the weapon perk, it will increase your group's critical hit chance, helping your DPS hit slightly harder, especially in those tight clump fights or when facing down a boss. But healing is just one side of the coin. Here's where it really gets exciting. You can contribute way more than just health bars with the Void Gauntlet or the Flail. These offhands let you boost your team's damage and add massive utility. First up, let's start with the Void Gauntlet. With the Void Blade, you're not a healer anymore. You're dishing out solid DPS. While your Void Blade provides lifesteal and reduces enemies' armor with rend, you're making your team hit harder while you're dishing out massive damage yourself. Now, when it comes to the Void Blade, it is unbelievable how much of a difference this makes to your team. Because with the Void Gauntlet, you get a lot of cooldowns when you crit, along with getting mana back if you're running 200 in. This allows you to drop more Oblivions, which we'll go into next, drop more Screams for CC, and can completely change the pace of the fight. So Oblivion, which I just mentioned, this is the real game changer. It empowers your entire group, so it increases their damage input and it also weakens your enemies. You're pushing your team's damage potential through the roof, while also reducing the damage they are taking. Now, on your mob packs, you want to look at taking Scream. This one here is a solid root, but you got to be careful not to use it before your team uses their grouping abilities, otherwise you can ruin and just waste the grab well. So wait for that grab well, that rupture, and when those mobs are nice and tight, hit that Scream to hold them in place. When you've got your Void Gauntlet out and you're smacking away those enemies, you're going to have that Scream up super often, so you can keep spamming that Scream, which is just going to keep those mobs in place and make it so much easier to kill them. Do be mindful though, if your team is trying to CC the mobs, be careful when you're screaming as you can ruin their CCs, but more likely in pug groups, people aren't going to be chaining their crowd control abilities as well, so being able to spam that scream will at least give the team some kind of CC and a little bit of stagger. On nature mutations and places where you need some disease, you can take the perk, Putrefying Scream, and this will greatly reduce the amount of healing that the mobs are getting. So if you are going to take Putrefying Scream on your Void Gauntlet, just ensure you do have Voracious Blade on your armor. Now last up, we're going to talk about Rupture. So you'll see the skill tree here. It looks a bit strange as we have 4 abilities, but what you want to do before boss fights is switch that Scream out over to Rupture. Now this here, when you use it on the enemy, is going to give your team some lifesteal when they're hitting them, And as you can't really CC them with Scream, this is just a nice little addition to add to that healing. One thing we need to think about when we're healing is not everything is coming from the life staff itself. The VG has a lot of options here. So if you can cut down the amount of damage that the enemies are doing to your team, that's less healing they require. And if you can get in there and deal damage and those mobs die so much quicker, you don't need to heal the team for as long. So there's kind of this breakpoint between playing super safe with high con and high healing, but the fight drags out a very long time, making that risk of dying so much higher because you're just dragging that fight out, versus just getting in, doing as much damage as you can, making that fight shorter and reducing the risk. Now, if the Void Gauntlet isn't quite your thing, you can look at the Flail. Now, the Flail isn't going to be as much damage as the Void Gauntlet, but offers the same utility. This is really your ultimate support weapon. You have Bludgeon, which when you jump up and you slam the ground, fortifies all of your allies, and it does reasonable damage. That there mixed with the perk will be on cooldown super quickly, allowing you to really fortify your team. Now the new artifact Power Stone is going to be super solid here too, because that is going to put out another 20% weaken. Next up you have Vortex. With Vortex you're cleansing debuffs and you're empowering your allies even more. So a massive boost in those fights to their empower, and if they get trapped in place, you can use Vortex to cleanse them and they can get back into the fight. So the next one is a little bit controversial and up to personal preference. You can either go Arcane Smite or you can go Arcane Eruption. Now myself and a few other of the top healers prefer Arcane Eruption. A huge part of this is debilitating extension. So if you see here, the follow-up attack extends the duration of all debilitating effects, so rend, weaken, exhaust, by 30%. This is huge. This way all of your debuffs that you're working so hard to get on these enemies, it will just extend it out that slight bit further. So the initial weaken on Smite is much lower, but it does have a higher weaken percentage, and you do have extra lifesteal. So this might just be one of the reasons why you choose Smite. So as a little bit of a debrief there, you need to be looking at your life stuff as your offhand. And then from there, you need to choose which main hand is going to work for you. If you want the absolutely high damage output and empower of the Void Gauntlet, or if you want the survivability, fortifying, and the fun factor of the Flail. Because as a healer in New World, you're not just casting abilities, you're leading the charge. You're keeping your team alive, sure, but you're also contributing to their damage. You're boosting the survivability and you're shutting down enemies with crowd control. You're not off on the sidelines, you need to get into the thick of the battle, making plays that win the fight. And this is what makes healing in New World one of the most rewarding roles. You're not just a passive support, you are a game changer. When you master this, you'll be the one your team cannot live without. Alright, so now we have a bit more of an understanding of what it means to be a healer. Let's start by breaking down your core healing abilities and how to use them to their full potential. So let's dive into the harder healing, rotations, and using your abilities. First up, one of the biggest mistakes I see from new healers is healing too early. You need to allow your tank to get to their pools, get the mobs to where they want them, and taunt before you heal. If they haven't taunted before you heal, all of the mobs are going to turn onto you. Then the tank has to waste another taunt to get those back, waste time to get them back to where they need to be in position, and by there they've likely lost aggro anyway. Wait for your tank to taunt. Once they've taunted, then we can go through our rotations. If your tank does die before they're in place and they've taunted, that is a tank skill issue, not yours. Your job is to let them do their thing before you jump in. This is coming from a tank main as well. If I get in, I get to my pool and I die before I'm even set up in place and taunted, that's a me problem and I need to look at adjusting the playstyle. So golden rule, let your tank get into position and taunt before you heal. Once a tank is locked in and is taunted, that's your cue to start healing. First up, we're going to go Orb of Protection. When it comes to using your orb, aim it at your tank's feet. That way you're not risking moving it. It'll explode when it hits the ground and it's likely to hit everyone within the area. It's quick, it provides a fortify, and it heals immediately. It's your go-to for kicking things off. Next, it's a little bit situational, but you're either looking at Beacon or Sacred Ground. Personally, I prefer Sacred Ground first because it gives better fortify and better healing, but there is an argument for using it last. That way it extends that fortify duration from your weapon perk. Either way, Sacred is key. When it comes to Beacon, you can either apply this on your tank, your DPS, or you can put it on the mob itself as it sticks to it. So let's say you're on a boss fight that's jumping around a lot. You can attach your beacon to the boss, and then that way, no matter where he moves to, if you follow that boss around, you're going to be within that beacon area. Now, the placement of Sacred is extremely important. High-level healers know that free casting Sacred is going to give you the best placement. If you just target cast it on your tank, you're wasting half of that juicy healing circle behind them. If it is possible, your tank should move back to the edge of the Sacred, so that way the DPS can jump in on the other side too. But if there isn't an option, place it on the mob pack itself, and then that way everyone can benefit. Don't just spam target casting on your tank. It's inefficient and it can put the heals in an awkward place, especially sometimes the tank gets pushed around or they'll get blown backwards. If you put a Sacred down at that exact time, the Sacred's not even going to be near the fight. So with Beacon, just use it to top the group up. Or if you find yourself in a boss fight with a lot of ranged DPS, consider switching out Beacon for Splash of Light. This will just give you a bit more group healing and take a bit of pressure off everyone. So the final thing, you should weave in light attacks between every ability. So this helps you recover your cooldowns faster, and with good timing, you'll have all of your abilities back up before they expire. So just Orb, Light Attack, Sacred, Light Attack, Beacon, Light Attack. Now that we've gone through that, the fun part, your offhand. So if you're using the Void Gauntlet, this is where you switch things up. After you've laid down your heals, you pull out your Void Gauntlet and start attacking with the Void Blade. The basic rotation here is to drop Oblivion for the group buff, the Empower the weakens, then hit Scream for the crowd control, ensuring you've done it after a grab well, and then just keep attacking until Oblivion is off cooldown and place Oblivion again. Once you've done this, your healing should be back up, dodge back out, get your healing going, and over time you'll get a feel for when you can be aggressive and how much you can kind of greed it in terms of delaying the heals. But at first, this rotation is nice and simple. You're doing the same thing every time and it keeps you safe while adding solid DPS. So just make sure you pop in a dodge before you drop your heals, as Bend Light will increase your outgoing healing by 20%, but this will also proc Protected Strength, which will give you another 20% on top of that. Now, if you're running the Flail instead, it is a similar approach. You start with Bludgeon to fortify your group, then use Vortex to empower them, hit Eruption to apply some Weaken and extend your debuffs. You can usually squeeze in another Bludgeon before switching back to your Life Staff if you have the weapon perk, as in larger packs it does cool down very quickly. The Flail is great for adding more crowd control, buffs, and it makes it perfect for a heavy support build if you really need to start looking after and keeping your team alive. Keep an eye on when your cooldowns are and cycle back to the life staff when you need to. So to sum up this section of the guide, wait for your tank to be in position, dodge, start with Orb of Protection, Light Attack, Sacred Ground, ensuring that positioning is really good on Sacred Ground, and then Beacon based on the situation, on the boss or on the mobs, or if you need to, Splash of Light. Don't be afraid to use your offhand to get some serious utility and damage, and with time you'll be able to adapt your rotation to any fight and be a powerhouse of both healing and damage. Next up, we're going to have a look into the gear and attributes and how you can optimize your build to get the most out of both your healing and your offhand. Now that we've covered how to properly use your healing abilities, let's get into one of the most important aspects of any healer's success, your gear and your attributes. Trust me, having the right setup can make all the difference in tough encounters. It's not just about keeping everyone alive, it's about being able to consistently keep them up while also contributing some damage of your own. So let's start with your armor. The first thing you'll want is Enchanted Ward on all of your gear. This is going to give you crucial resistance at both physical and elemental, light and heavy attacks, which you'll face a lot in expeditions. Enchanted Ward is going to give you the best protection against the widest range of attacks. Pair that with 4 Refreshing on your gear. Refreshing is key because it lowers your cooldowns, letting you throw out all those important heals more often. Next, let's talk about specific perks. You'll want Keen Beacon and Mending Orb on your armor. Keen Beacon boosts your critical chance, and Orb of Protection makes all of your heals even stronger. Both of these will make your healing more effective, especially when your team is stacked up in big fights. If you guys have a look at the website, go into Healer and then go either Flail or Void Healer. There will be some recommendations here and some images showing you what perks you want. Now, I have put Mending Protection on the Aeternum leather pants on the website. The only reason I've done this is quite often in high level content, you want to be able to switch around some armor pieces, so you can switch gems to match different bosses or different areas of a dungeon or raid. So just by having that on the Aeternum leather pants means that you don't have to have 2 pieces with Mending Protection on it. Another option is you can just put health on it and then look at putting Mending Protection on another piece of armor. I can't emphasize enough the importance of regemming your gear and having multiple sets for different types of content. So when it comes to doing mutations, you have your elemental sets throughout the mutation. But on specific bosses, there are recommended protections. You can find that under the general section on the website too. So whether you're switching out to a slash, a strike, or a different elemental, just because you're a healer, it doesn't excuse you from needing to gem up properly. Now you will see here we've got some really good perks that we call illegal perks. There's a Silken Litham, which actually has Savior on it. This one here says healing is increased by up to 20% when you heal a target below 50%. This here is going to pair very well with your Mending Protection. If you look at the chest piece, it has some illegal perk combos of Keen and Shirking Energy. This will be great for helping keep your stamina topped up, and having Keen on your armor actually frees up a slot on your weapon. This can be a little bit tricky as these pieces need to come from the Worm Raid, so feel free to switch these out for Azoth Crystal gear as required. When it comes to your amulet, at a minimum you want to have health. You want to have some kind of protection to match the content you're doing. So whether it's an elemental one to match a mutation, a strike or a slash to protect against a specific boss. And then you can look at either having Refreshing, which would free up a piece on your armor to add either health or another weapon perk, or you can have Empowered. just to make those empowers last a little bit longer. For your ring, you absolutely have to have Hearty and Sacred. Hearty will allow you to have a third dodge, whereas Sacred increases your outgoing healing. Now for your last perk, you can either look at Keen Awareness or you can look at Leeching. We generally recommend Keen Awareness, especially when using the Void Gauntlet. But if you feel like you want a little bit more healing, do chuck Leeching on there instead. For the earring, I usually recommend putting Refreshing on the earring as it does free up space on your armor. Then you can look at Refreshing Toast, Healthy Toast, Nimble, Empowering Toast, or Fortifying Toast. These are all great options to put on your earring. Now let's have a bit of a look at the weapons. So for your life staff, there's 3 perks that you really want to focus on. You want Refreshing Move, you want Blessed, and you want Fortifying Sacred Ground. So Refreshing Move, pretty obvious how this one works. It lowers your cooldowns with every hit, which is amazing when we're chaining in those light attacks in between our abilities to get those cooldowns down. Blessed gives you more healing output, and Fortifying Sacred Ground adds an extra layer of protection when your team stands in that sacred healing zone. Keep in mind with Fortifying Sacred Ground, it will only refresh the Fortifying when you still have your life staff out. When you switch to your offhand, that Fortifying Sacred Ground will no longer refresh on them, but it will last the full duration. If you're running the Flail, the Power Stone Flail is fantastic. It gives you a 20% weaken effect on enemies, making it perfect for debuffing while keeping your team buffed up. So this fits well into any support heavy healer build. For Power Stone, you really want to have Refreshing Move, Enchanted, and Crowded Bludgeon. The Refreshing on Crowded Bludgeon is unbelievable, and in a huge pack of enemies, it'll almost instantly reset. So there are a few debates once it comes to the Void Gauntlet, so you'll need to find what works for your playstyle. I personally like Voracious Blade and Vicious. I really like having Voracious Blade on the Void Blade. You get more healing, and there's one less weapon perk you have to worry about when you're going for your weapon switches. Now, some other healers say that you get more than enough healing when Voracious Blade is on your armor, but I feel like while you're learning, Voracious Blade on the Void Gauntlet is going to be your best option. The next option is between Vicious and Enchanted. So generally, there's things called backless bosses. There's certain bosses that essentially don't have a back and aren't guaranteed crits, and that's where you look at going for Enchanted. The next one to toss up is Refreshing Move, Keen, and Attunement. Some healers swear by Refreshing Move, and others feel like you don't need it. The Void Gauntlet gets a lot of cooldowns when you crit, so that's why Keen can be really solid, especially in mob packs when you can't guarantee that you're going to be getting those backstabs. Going for a combo like Keen, Vicious, and Voracious Blade is super solid. On single target, you can look at Attunement. It doesn't work very well in pack, so let's say on single target, you might look at more like Refreshing Move, Attunement, and Enchanted, or Vicious. Whereas on your mob packs, you'll look at either going Refreshing Move or Keen, Vicious, and then either Voracious Blade, or if you need the disease, Putrefying Scream. So as for armor artifacts, you've got some flexibility here. So you can either run Nibble Coat, which comes from the PvP track, for some serious cooldown reduction and extra protection. I know my good friend Forqotten, who is my healer in our speedrun group, he swore by Nimble Coat just because the cooldown reduction made his rotations between the life staff and the Void Gauntlet that much smoother. Nimble Coat can be pretty hard to obtain as it is on the PvP track. So if you don't have it, you can look at the Attune Leather Pants. So Attune Leather Pants gives you an extra 40 to 44 extra stat points. So you'd probably look at putting 10 extra points into Strength and Dex. If you're on the Void Blade, or if you're on the Flail, you would put extra points into Int and Dex. And it just gives you some more attribute points to work with. With the Nimble Coat, you've got your extra cooldowns, and you can put Enchanted Ward on it, which is better protection. Or the Attune Leather Pants, it is easier to acquire and gives you extra stat points. So when we're looking into the attributes, when you're learning the ropes, I do recommend going with 100 Constitution, 300 Focus, and 200 Int if you're running the Void Blade, or 200 Strength if you're running the Flail. This setup gives you enough survivability while still maintaining solid healing and damage potential. So once you're more comfortable, you can adjust a more aggressive build, something like 50 Constitution with 250 to 300 Focus and 300 Intelligence or Strength. The setup does lean harder into your damage output while still keeping your healing really strong. So let's talk about some of the bonuses you'll get at different attribute thresholds. So these bonuses are really important for maximizing your performance and can help you decide where you want to put points. So let's start with Constitution. At 50 Constitution, you get an extra 5% physical armor, which is great for reducing incoming damage. When it comes to healing, you can absolutely at that top pinnacle look at going 5 con, but it really isn't worth it. As a healer, you end up pulling extra aggro, and you're not really hitting any more exciting breakpoints by dropping down to 5 con. At 100 con, you get a 10% boost to your maximum health. This one here is game-changing in tough fights where the extra health can mean the difference between surviving or just getting one shot. If you're going for the 100 Constitution option, really try and get a few more health pieces in your armor, as it will help you exponentially in that sense. If you find yourself struggling to stay alive, definitely go with that 100 Constitution. It is a solid choice. One thing that we've forgotten to mention earlier, with healing, you basically only want to go light armor, as you do get a 30% increase in your healing and light armor. So if you're really still struggling at that 100 con bonus, maybe even look at upping it to 150 or 200. I know in PvP, 150 is a really solid breakpoint, but I'd much rather see you running 300 focus and 200 con than see you going up to a medium or a heavy build. Now for intelligence, especially if you're running the Void Gauntlet, at 200 intelligence, you gain 10% mana on crits, which is huge because you're critting so often with the Void Blade. It lets you sustain your abilities much longer. And at 300 intelligence, you get 7% base damage to targets below 50% health. This bonus is massive during boss fights and mob encounters when you're helping finish off that last section of the enemies. This is where we talked about earlier, where you'll start to get a feel about when you can greed your heals. If you see the mobs are around kind of 20 to 30% health, everyone looks like the fight's pretty stable. Honestly, quite often I wouldn't even switch to heals. Make the call, hey guys, I'm holding sacred here, be careful, and just keep smacking away and get those mobs dead. So next is strength, which is important if you're running the flail. At 25 strength, you'll get 5% light attack damage. It doesn't sound like much, but it does add up over a fight. So at 100 strength, you're going to get a 10% physical damage bonus, which is obviously really good with the flail. 200 strength, we have 10% bonus damage on stunned, slowed, or rooted enemies. Almost all the mobs should be slowed, apart from enemies that can't be slowed with the amount of abilities you have within the team. And at 300 strength, we have plus 7% base damage while under 90% health. Now that one is actually a little bit ambiguous. It doesn't say whether you're under 90% health or the enemies. Whereas on intelligence at 300, it says plus 7% base damage to targets below 50% health. But if it's plus 7% base damage while you're under 90% health, I believe that is while you yourself are under 90% health. So finally, let's talk about focus. So this one is your primary healing stat. The early breakpoints here are really important. Obviously, you've got your ability cooldowns and your incoming damage with your 25 and 50 breakpoints. Your 150 and your 200 breakpoints are super important with your extra healing and your buff duration. And from here, they start to fall off a little bit. So I know our speedrun healer, he would actually often run between 200 and 250 focus. As you're learning to heal, sit around that 300 mark until you really want to start min-maxing your damage, then start bringing that down slowly if you need to. So as you can see, hitting the right attribute thresholds can really enhance your gameplay. So whether you're focusing on strength for the flail, intelligence for the void gauntlet, or focus for maximizing your healing, each threshold bonus brings something valuable to the table. Don't forget about your constitution. It's what will keep you alive long enough to do your job. If you go down, everything falls apart. So now that you've got your gear and attributes sorted, let's move on to some advanced healing tips and techniques to really push your skills to the next level. All right, so now we talk about keybinds. Having the right keybinds as a healer is crucial for reacting quickly, swapping weapons efficiently, and getting those clutch heals out when things get chaotic. Now, this can be the difference between saving your tank and watching your whole group wipe. I'm going to give you some general tips, but ultimately you'll want to tweak the setup to what feels best for you. So you guys will be super surprised when it comes to your keybinds on how much of a difference it can make. To get to your keybinds, just open up your settings here, come up to the cog in the right-hand corner, hit settings, and then on the game one here, you'll come down, scroll down a little bit, and you'll come across healing. Now, I've spoken to a couple of the high-end healers, and this is what they do. They literally just come through and they turn everything off. When it comes to healing, you really want to be focusing on free casting your healing. So if you have targeted healing enabled, when you try and pop open a sacred, it'll automatically lock onto a target, and you'll have to middle mouse button to switch it to free cast. This way, having it on free cast, you can place it exactly where you need to in the fight like we were talking about earlier. So once again, cog, settings, all the way down to healing, and literally just turn everything off. One other thing you can look at doing is enemy target lock here, having this on or off. I would leave it off as it can be quite frustrating accidentally clicking onto a mob, target locking, and then it whips your camera around to where you're not expecting. Another important part for key bindings is coming to the keyboard and mouse or the controller, come down to life staff combat. Now this here is where you can set your keybinds for your healing options. What I really like to do is you can see here group member 1 through 5. At the start of your content, whether it be a raid or expedition or you just open world, whichever member your tank is on, so on the left you'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're basically always number 1. So whichever one your tank is on, set a keybind to it. I usually have mine on the scroll wheel. So then that way if I panic and I can't see the tank or I need to quickly get a sacred down, all I have to do is hit sacred. And if I quickly wheel up or wheel down, they'll auto place it onto the tank. So usually in PvP, they'll set a keybind to every single one of these in the group. Can get a little bit tricky. You start running out of optimal keys. So my recommendation is just setting one to the tank is almost like a panic button. And outside of that, you're essentially just always free casting those heals. Sometimes it does pay to have a target self as well. So you can either have that on this top one here, or you can have it as group member 1, since you're essentially always group member 1. And then that way, if you're panicking and you're trying to get a sacred and you want to quickly place it down on yourself, all you have to do is hit that target self button and it'll drop it directly on you. So now we need to look at the mindset you need to succeed as a healer. With the healing in New World, isn't just about reacting. It's about staying a step ahead and anticipating what's coming. You need to be proactive. If you're always reacting to damage after it happens, it's too late. Try to watch the fight closely, especially your tank's movements, and know when the big damage is coming so you can precast Sacred, drop Orb of Protection, or even just dodge out of the way if you need to. You always need to stay calm. Healers can easily panic when things go wrong, but the key is to remain focused and make the right decisions under pressure. Don't overcommit your heals early on. Learn to trust your tank and give them time to do their job. If you find yourself throwing out heals too soon, you might actually be causing more problems than you're solving. Don't look at rushing too much into your offhand. I know I always really push into using your blade or your flail, but really get a feel of the battle. If it's chaotic, take a step back, try and calm everyone down, regroup, say, hey, I'm going to place a sacred in this spot. Come on, guys, let's regroup. Once everything's kind of under control again, then you can start looking at going through those rotations that we talked about earlier. So a big part of healing effectively is your positioning. So as a healer, where you stand is just as important as what you cast. So you want to position yourself close enough to your group to heal everyone. And sometimes that even means being right next to your tank. Quite often you'll pull extra aggro as a healer, a mob, an archer, something off in the distance. If no one's taunted or hit those, they will automatically aggro on you as a healer. So there's a couple ways of dealing with this. If it's a melee mob, don't just kite it around in circles. Bring it into your tank. Say, hey, I've got aggro, I'm bringing something in. Ideally, you would already be in there on your blade or on your flail, but just keep that communication up. Hey man, I've got this mob on me, I'm dragging it through you. Then the tank might go, hold off, I'm 5 seconds off a taunt or etc. What you really need to look at doing is bringing things into the clump and into the tank. When it comes to ranged mobs, this here is where a good healer can really shine. So depending on the content you're doing, there's usually some kind of structure, whether it be a rock, a wall, a corner that you can hide behind. So what you can do is you can shoot far off archers or ranged mobs, or if you already have aggro of them, just tuck in behind one of these structures. Once you break that line of sight, the ranged mob will run all the way into you. This here is a really great way to be able to tighten up your grouping and bring range mobs into the pack where everyone's fighting. With your heals more specifically, if your team is clumped up, you want to place a sacred ground where it hits the most people. In most cases, you'll end up on the tank. At that point, they do need to move back a little bit, but really try and look at keeping your DPS safe just as much as the tank. The tank usually has enough utility that they can look after themselves a little bit, and tanks do need to take a little bit of responsibility for their own survival. Once you get to the point with really good DPS running low con, you really got to keep that sacred and mending orb uptime for that fortify. It can really be the difference between a good run and just starting again. So with the aggro control, one of the easiest ways to ruin a pull is by pulling aggro off the tank. The biggest mistake healers make is just casting too soon. So just let your tank get in, taunt. Ideally, if you're in Discord, tell them, hey man, can you tell me when you've taunt? Can you tell me when you shockwave? This is something as a tank that I never used to do, and that was feedback that I got from my healer. And once we started doing that and communicating a little bit when we got taunts, oh, I need a couple seconds, our synergy really went through the roof. So we're just going to do a quick recap on everything we covered just to really get it locked in. So we started at looking at what it means to be a healer in New World, focusing not just on healing, but on how we can use your abilities and offhand weapons to provide buffs, debuffs, and even dish out some serious damage with the Void Gauntlet or the Flail. We broke down your rotations on how to prioritize Orb of Protection, Sacred Ground, and Beacon, while keeping an eye on cooldowns and making sure you're always light attacking between abilities. We also covered how to weave in the Void Gauntlet and the Flail to boost your group's overall performance. Next, we covered all the gear and attributes that'll make all of this possible. With Enchanted Ward, Refreshing, and key perks like Keen Beacon and Mending Orb, you'll be optimizing your gear to maximize both the healing and the survivability. And then when it comes to attributes, with your stacking Focus for healing, Strength for the Fail, or Intelligence for the Void Gauntlet, we explored attribute bonuses that'll make your build shine. We also went over the importance of having the right mindset, staying proactive, calm under pressure, and always thinking ahead. Then we talked about positioning and aggro control, making sure you're standing in the right spot and not pulling aggro before the tank has locked things down. At the end of the day, healing in New World isn't just about keeping people alive. It's about knowing when to support, when to buff, when to DPS, and being able to do all of that without panicking. Master these techniques and you'll not only be a better healer, you'll be the cornerstone of your team's success. So there you have it. Everything you need to know to become a top tier healer in New World. Thank you so much for watching, and if you found this guide helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Now get out there, heal your team to victory, and I'll catch you in the next one.